Good morning and welcome to the special board meeting of the Ventura Unified School District Board of Education. I'm Vice President Sabrina Rodriguez and President Matt Alvarez is feeling under the weather. So I'll be your host this morning. Do we have any amendments to the agenda, Dr. Rice?
Yes, thank you, Trustee Rodriguez. We would like to recommend to the board that we pull item 6B. That's a closed session item regarding the superintendent's evaluation for consideration of rescheduling on the 9th or the 11th. I believe Ms. Dom has reached out to you to see if we can get a date set up.
Okay, any objections? Great, thank you. Ms. Dom, would you take a vote?
I'll make a motion.
Sorry, I guess we need a motion.
I'll make a motion that we approve the agenda as presented.
I'm so rusty at this.
Don't make me laugh. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Vote as follows. Trustee Lomax. I see her nodding. Trustee Dannenberg.
Yes.
Thank you. Trustee Callahan.
Yes.
Trustee Rodriguez.
Yes.
And Trustee Alvarez.
Yes.
The motion carries 5-0.
And just a question: do we not need a roll, to do the like roll call on this, like who's here taking attendance on these? It's not on our agenda, but I thought we usually do that. No, not on a special board meeting.
I believe we do that for regular session, not at closed.
Okay. Oh, okay. So never mind. It's at the, thank you. It's lower down. Okay. So do I have any public comments on closed session items?
At this time, we have no public comment on closed session.
Great, thank you. So we'll entertain a motion where we'll go into closed session to discuss pupil matters pursuant to Ed Code 35146, 48916, and 48918.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Vote as follows. Trustee Lomax.
Yes.
Trustee Dannenberg.
Yes.
Trustee Callahan.
Yes.
Trustee Rodriguez.
Yes.
And Trustee Alvarez.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion carries 5-0.
So this item should be relatively short. So if anyone is planning to remain, I think we'll be back in not too long a time. Okay, thanks.
And everybody should have a link to closed session, right? Mm-hmm. Okay.
We can go ahead and return to regular session. If you would join me in standing for the Pledge of Allegiance. Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I haven't had to do that on camera. Hopefully I didn't mess that up. I usually print up the words because you get stressed out trying to do that on camera. I'm like, wait, did I remember them all? You do it all through elementary school and then you forget. Okay, so Ms. Dawn, would you please call roll?
Sure, I'd be happy to. President Matt Alvarez.
Here.
Vice President Sabrina Rodriguez.
Here.
Trustee Amy Callahan.
Here.
Trustee Dr. Jerry Dannenberg.
Here.
Trustee Ms. Velma Lomax.
Here.
And Superintendent Dr. Roger Rice.
Here.
Thank you.
Okay, report of action taken in closed session. No actions were taken in closed session today. Do we have any public comments on the open session items?
If anyone has a public comment, can you please use the raise hand icon at the bottom of your screen? I believe we do have one public comment today. Mr. Nelson, if you don't mind turning off your video, as this is an audio public comment. Thank you very much. I'm going to get your timer set up here. As you know, you've got 3 minutes, and I'll give you a 30-second warning. All right, are you ready?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
I just want to say for the record how much I appreciate you guys setting up the redistricting for the school board elections. I don't know if this is the right time to talk about it, but golly, I sure liked that last time you guys did it. And I don't think I said the right thing last time. Otherwise, yeah, now I'm just appreciating that you guys are giving the people of Ventura the opportunity to support public education. Everywhere I go, I hear, people love their schools and people love their teachers. And so by talking about a bond issue, it gives people the opportunity to, kind of put their money where their mouth is. And there's a lot of support out for public education and for school kids. So this conversation is great to have, and I appreciate you guys taking the time to do it.
Very much. And that is it for public comment today. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. So now we have item 12A, administrative recommendation for student readmission from expulsion or suspended order. Do I have a motion?
Move to readmit student as outlined by staff.
Second.
Thank you. Vote as follows. Trustee Lomax,
Yes.
Trustee Vandenberg,
Yes.
Trustee Callahan,
Yes.
Trustee Rodriguez,
Yes.
and Trustee Alvarez.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion carries 5-0.
Great, thank you. And that brings us to item 12B, consideration for approval of resolution 2204, ordering an election to authorize the issuance of a general obligation bond. You should have received the resolution from Dr. Chandler yesterday.
And Vice President Rodriguez, if I could jump in, just make a few introductory comments before I turn it over to Dr. Chandler. I just want to say I appreciate the board making time this morning to have this very important discussion. As VUEA President Nelson mentioned, it's a really important discussion to have for our schools, and the timeliness of this couldn't be more urgent. I think I shared with you in a recent update that we appreciate Mr. Isom's efforts to expedite the tracking poll that was recently shared and that we have available for you today. And unfortunately, those tracking poll results, although they were expedited, came in after the agendize, the effort to agendize it at the last board meeting. So we missed the deadline. We didn't have the results, and we didn't think we should have the discussion before you had the polling results. So now we're on a short timeline, and we appreciate your patience with that and look forward to the discussion ahead. So Dr. Chandler.
Good morning, trustees. Thank you for being here. And you will also see that we have our financial advisor, John Isom, and he will present to us the polling results, which you should have also received, and then we will discuss the resolution. So, Mr. Isom, can you share your screen?
I believe so. Let me get this teed up here. Okay. Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here, albeit again virtually. I'm going to pull up the survey results presentation because that's going to be kind of the precursor to this discussion. And by way of reminder, as you know, we previously had been given the authority to go forward, test the waters, and find out what the attitudes were towards a potential bond program. And as I pull this up, I think I've got this. Okay, I'm going to talk, and if for some reason you don't see the tracking poll results presentation for Ventura Unified, I'm sure someone will let me know. So the objective here really was to track prior survey results. We know that back in 2019, we had an opportunity to survey the community. The results came back pretty positively. But a lot has changed. You don't need me to explain all of the things that have changed with respect to the pandemic and everything else that's gone along with that. So it's always wise to take the pulse of the community. And that's why you do a tracking poll. We call it a tracking poll versus a survey because it just really means it's shorter in length. And it also asks the same questions that have been asked before. So we're able to kind of track and see what kind of movement there is. So you can see some of this on this first line. We basically collected all the data in about a week's time, a little less than a week, again, to test attitudes towards whether we could pass a bond and what that might look like. 401 households were contacted, which is what our goal was. And that gives us a margin of error about 4.88%. So some just kind of general stuff. I'm going to take you through the presentation. And the questions that we asked were more or less similar to the order of what you're going to see in this presentation. We may have moved around a question or two, but it's really more for the ease of presenting. But when we asked about how are things in Ventura in general, we had 27 wrong, 57 right. That's pretty, unchanged, a little bit more negative than our original questions. How would you rate the quality of education? District gets very good marks, basically over 2/3 of the voters think the district's doing a, fair, good, or excellent job, with about 16% don't know, 12 saying poor. This was, again, slightly lower support than the earlier questions. And I'm going to bring a comparison on specific questions that I think are notable or have a stark contrast. Otherwise, I'm just going to give you some of this, color commentary. This was a new question on the left, but we thought it would give you guys at least a little bit of feedback on how you guys are doing with COVID, and at least the perception of how you're doing with COVID. And you can see here, I would say generally strong marks as far as your reaction to this. For a lot of districts, their impression is a lot different based on, what's going on at board meetings or in, Facebook groups or Nextdoor or whatever. Sometimes all we hear is one, loud voice, and this gives us an idea, statistically at least speaking, of how people feel about that. The one on the right, this also tracks similarly to the first one, which is just, you never want to have a survey where we're only asking your parents of kids in school, especially because you'll have skewed data if that's the case. So this is, again, true to form from the last time. So this is one of the first questions that comes out with respect to the bond. And we read this big, long, I think I've said it before, run-on sentence, but it's similar to the ballot language, 75 words that a voter might read or have in the sample ballot or on their actual ballot for that matter. And we said, if the election were held today, would you vote yes to approve or no to disapprove? And you can see the results here, 54% yes, 30% no, and then the balance being kind of a lean yes, undecided, and don't know. Now, how does that compare to last time? Last time, the survey, we had a little bit more support, right? You can see on the right-hand side the 2019 data comparing to the 2022 data. So a little fewer yeses and a little more nos. But generally speaking, you're still in that mid 50% level of support with about, a fourth to a third of your voters in the no camp. Now, this is kind of absent information. So we said, well, let's get into some specifics. Like, it is a tax. I want you to know it's a tax, and I want to test these tax rates with you. And this is where we see a pretty marked difference. So half of the people got the $60 a year on the left. The other half got the $5 a month on the right. And you can see the level of support and opposition is fairly split, almost 50-50. At least between, just straight yeses and straight nos. But compare that to the August 19 survey, where instead of 45% yes, we had 52 with 5 leans, so 57% compared to 47%. And then look at the no's, you had 48% in this tracking poll versus 38%. So it seems like there's, a 10% change in levels of support as it relates to the tax rate. Similarly, we see, the same thing with the $5 a month. And this was interesting because a lot of times when you break it down monthly, you get a little bit of an improvement. I mean, there's a reason why if you go on TV and whether you're buying CDs or helping a child in Africa or the homeless or, you know, anything 19.99 or whatever, they break it down, you know, for just a couple of pennies a day or a few bucks a month, you can have this. So this was interesting to see, not much movement there. But again, a little disappointing to see such an erosion of support on the tax rate. So we tested different rates. Okay, well, let's lower it. How about $49 or $4 a month? Another interesting fact here is that we didn't get that much of a bump by lowering the tax rate. Still kind of are at this mid 40s for yeses and nos, but we did get the bump back in August. And I'm going to go back and forth here just a little bit. But if you look on August 2019 for the $49 a year, you were at 60 and 60 plus 3 with the liens, 63%. Going back here, we were at 57%. Okay, so that's a pretty good jump, right? We jumped 6 percentage points between the 57% at $60, and it's like, okay, well, we lower it. All right, we got up to 63%. We didn't really see a jump, which tells me that this is not about a dollar amount so much as it is just about the concept of a tax. This kind of held true throughout. So we went and said, how about $36 a year? And once again, the voters didn't really seem to be moved all that much. We only went up by 1 basis point, 48% and 49%. And yet again, compare that to the August 2019 at $36 a year, where you were all the way up at 68%. So there's definitely some significant tax sensitivities, at least as it related to the survey conducted, or this tracking poll conducted in January. Now here's what we call a ballot post benchmark ballot measure question, post benchmark. And this is, all right, we've asked you these questions, we've let you know it's a tax, we kind of gave you an idea of the ballpark. Now, what do you think if we were to put this in front of you? And we actually had a little bit of erosion from our pre-education support, meaning when they learned that it was a tax, we lost some support. Some of the don't knows and leans became definite knows. And some of the yeses actually became, you know, we don't track individually, but presumably became a lean yes or an undecided. Again, our goal here is to find something in the 55% range, but this is something that we saw, you know, pretty significant erosion on. And again, we're comparing ourselves to the pre-education or pre-benchmark question to the post-benchmark question. Where it gets a little bit more pronounced is if you look to the right, the 2019 post-benchmark question, once we've educated them, told them it's a tax, told them how we're going to spend the money, the support among voters went up, you know, fairly substantially to 60.5% yes, with another 6% in the lean yes. Or again, our tracking poll numbers really didn't go up. Now, the one caveat I'm going to place here is, unlike the 2019 survey, where there was a fair amount of education on how we would spend the money, replacing leaky roofs, upgrading inadequate electrical, working on career technical labs, providing new ones or renovating old ones, health and safety. There is, I believe, some certain benefit when you're telling someone all of the positives that come out of something, even if they know that it's a tax, versus saying nothing, right? I mean, anyone who's got kids or grandkids, when they say, oh, can I have some money? And then, you know, our initial reaction, or at least mine as a dad, is no. But then they try to tell you about all the great things that this money is going to go for, whether it's a tasty ice cream cone or a great toy or something. You're going to get that persuasive, positive side of things, and it no longer becomes just a dollar and cents thing, but there's actually something to go with it. So I don't want this to be, you know, a complete, you know, doom and gloom, in the sense that, holy cow, that's crazy that we've lost so much. We would expect to see a little bit of a decline, because we don't get that favorable side when you're doing the tracking poll. Okay, so some pretty significant stuff here. Support by voter propensity. This is an interesting one as well, because oftentimes what we want to look at is, we want to look at going in June, or we want to go in November. And when you look at this information and you say, okay, well, let's look at just the June voters, those that are high propensity voters. They never miss an election. They vote in every election. How do they feel about it? And you can see the data here, pretty consistent with the overall support, 51% yes, 40% no. Okay, then let's look at the lower propensity voters. And the lower propensity voters actually tracked very similarly. So there wasn't much of a distinction here, as is usually the case. What is usually the case is that your November only voters are low propensity. They tend to only show up in November. That's the terminology we're using here. They tend to be younger, right? They're maybe your high school kids, your college kids, young parents. They tend to be a little more Democrat. They just tend to have demographics that are a little bit more supportive of these types of measures. Now, we didn't see that here. That doesn't necessarily mean that it doesn't exist here, but at least on the survey data that we have, statistically, that's not showing here. So, when it's all said and done, when we're talking about, what do we get out of this whole tracking poll, I think what we're seeing here is consistent with what we're seeing in other parts of the state, which is a little bit of trepidation, given where we are economically speaking, and I think with the pandemic, and I think you're seeing a little bit of, sensitivities on tax rates that previously didn't exist pre-pandemic. I think, and my recommendation here at the bottom would be to pursue a November election for the following reasons. Number one, what we know is that historically speaking, in your district, you guys have had great success on measures in front of voters in November, right? All of our parcel taxes have always been successful there. So we know that in Ventura, past practice, past track record has indicated over 2/3, over 67% support in a high turnout election, okay? Number two, I think that while, again, this particular survey question didn't really delineate much, I would rely on my past experience working with dozens and dozens of districts who, when given the choice, and even given the survey data, between a low turnout election and a high turnout election, the survey data and the actual results have supported a high turnout election. I have a number of districts that are similar to you guys, right? Right now you're evaluating, do we go, do we not go, do we do a bond, how does it look? And universally, all of the districts that I've worked with thus far on this question, the data has come back, while you could possibly pass a bond in June, you're better off going in November. Or more strongly, while you can't pass a bond in June, or that's the belief based on the survey data, we think that November gives you the better chance. And the final reason for this June-November question, if we do just rely wholly on the survey data and this 55% threshold, the mood right now among your voters, post measure, even pre-measure, is 51%. You add in the leans, you're in the low 50s. So this survey data snapshot in time tells me that perhaps Ventura Unified School District is not ready to pass a bond based on the current climate that we find ourselves in. So those would be my recommendations based on my expertise and my experience. And I know there's other variables that oftentimes are discussed, and I'm sure that'll be part of the discussion as well. But I just wanted to give you, our take and our recommendation based on this tracking poll. So happy to take any questions that folks have on this. And if there are none, I could certainly speak to the resolution as well.
Okay, do you mind not sharing so that way it's a little easier to see people, unless people want to continue to see the presentation. And then if we can start in traditional order, Ms. Lomax.
I hate going from last to first.
First off, is that okay if I stop sharing, or is there anyone
Yes,
who wants
yes,
to
please,
data up?
please.
Stop. Okay. Yes.
Okay. That way we can see everybody's reactions to what we have to say. So I do have a question, and maybe I don't expect you to answer it now. It's just something to like, if we're going to put this off and then educate the public, I would like some statistics on how many districts around us. You already answered it last time, how many had gone for other bonds, and then how many are still going for bonds either now or in the maybe within the next year, to show that while we are doing this, we are way behind, and other districts are adding tax upon tax, where we're adding tax upon a 20-some-odd-year-old tax. I just think that would be helpful in educating people that we were, in my opinion, because I'm the board member that can take responsibility for this being around so long, a little bit remiss in waiting so long. And now it would be a shame if we weren't able to pass it, but the public needs to understand that the bonds that we did before are almost completely paid for, and other districts don't have that luxury. They have bond on top of bond on top of bond. So I think it's fair to say to the public that we're not overtaxing you. In fact, we're not even catching up. But I would need some specifics. And I don't know if you have that data, but someone can get that data so that we can use it. And then the other question that I had, that was kind of a comment, I apologize, is to me, the slides are so close. Would you be doing another survey after we do some education to try to see if it gets closer if we wait for a November election?
Yeah, I would think another tracking poll certainly could be in order. I certainly also think that there are some trend lines or some things that we could look around. I mean, I don't want to say the timing was bad for this tracking poll, because we had to kind of do it, right? I mean, it's like you guys needed information, so you do the tracking poll and you do the tracking poll. But I think, this Omicron strain is kind of a pretty big deal, and I think got people concerned again. Things going on with respect to masks and vaccines haven't died down. So fast forward, a few months, I think if a number of these things have gone away, maybe we don't need to do a tracking poll. It just never hurts, right? I mean, I'm cost sensitive to the fact that you do these and it costs you, a few $1,000s. And there's great value here. You don't want to be penny wise and pound foolish, considering you're talking hundreds of millions of dollars on a potential bond. But I think we could all agree that if all of a sudden things, improved and everyone kind of felt an improvement, just getting rid of some of these dark clouds that have been hanging overhead could argue against doing a tracking poll, but I would probably recommend just doing one more sometime in May, for example. And maybe we take the opportunity in the next few months to do a little bit more outreach, because we can either do outreach on a phone survey and remind them of all the great projects, or we can do kind of a little public information campaign explaining to people, to your point, of the need to, keep up your schools that were kind of last or close to last in the county as far as, bond dollars per student, tax rates, all those other considerations. So there's a lot of things that we can certainly do to gauge whether or not there's an improvement among your voters.
Dr. Rice, I see you have your hand raised.
Thank you, Trustee Rodriguez. If you're open to it, I do have 2 slides I can show very quickly from a presentation that Mr. Isom presented last time that answer Velma's question, or that are directly responsive to it. Let me do that. Share screen. Okay, so can you guys all see that?
Yes.
Okay, so this is just showing the date when we had our last GO bond and what the amount was. And then this one is a little more responsive, which shows you as of the last time we did this, these are the districts named here and bond dollars that have been passed per student. And we, at this point when we did this, we were the least leveraged district in the county, meaning we haven't gone to the voters to rely on them to the same degree that these other districts have. And you can see many of them to a much, much greater degree. And then you can see the dollar amounts that go with that. And again, we're down here with the one bond passed since that time frame. And some of the districts that Trustee Lomax was referencing have had, 3 bonds, 5 bonds, 5 bonds, 3 bonds, and so on. And we've had 1. So I hope that.
I have one more question, either for you or Mr. Isom. We do a parcel tax. Do any of these other districts do parcel taxes as well as general bonds?
I believe the only other parcel tax district is Oak Park.
Okay. Because that will be asked.
Mm-hmm.
I think too, I have a more updated version of that. I could send it to you guys on a Friday letter, but I have the same side that Dr. Rice showed. I have a more updated version of that one, of all the bonds that were passed last year.
Perfect, thanks.
Dr. Dannenberg.
Yeah, John, just remind me of the percentage we need to pass a bond this year.
55% if you go on the regularly scheduled election and you adopt what's known as a Prop 39 resolution. You could, no one does it anymore, but you could do what's called a Prop 46 bond and pick any Tuesday and not go on a regularly scheduled election. Those require 67%, similar to what this district did, the one bond it passed in 1997. But if you were to pursue a regularly scheduled Prop 39 bond, the threshold is 55.
Thank you.
Anything else, Dr. Dannenberg?
No, I'm done. Thank you.
Amy?
Thank you. Thank you for all this information. Can you remind me how much of a difference, but how below we are of the 55% right now based off of your polls? Wasn't it only 1 or 2% or less than 1? And when we add in the likely voters, the likely yeses?
I think the lean yeses, I think, is what you're referring to. If you add the lean yeses in, I would say we're probably in the 53% range. Without the lean yeses, and you're looking at just the regular yeses, right? You're at 51 point and change. So call it 51, 52. Okay. And with the leans, you're at 53, 54.
And then thank you. So we're right there, right? We're right there.
Right.
And are you sharing that in your expertise, typically people are what a margin of plus minus 5%, 10% when you do these polls before making these type of, in your presentation for similar districts like ourselves that are making this decision?
Yeah, you usually, we're about 4%, a little above 4% as far as a margin of error. And that's essentially the goal for all of these surveys. We try to get 400. If you're a really, really large district, you'd say 600. If you're a really small, you can't get 400, right? You're just trying to get, 200 or 100 in the really small districts. So 400 is the goal, which is what we got there. And that gives us that margin of error about 4.8.
I'm sorry, I was confusing in my question.
Okay.
What would have you, because we have your recommendations, what would turn your recommendation as far as what you would need to see as an expert in the polling results? What percentage would you like to feel and see?
Yeah, 55.
To change your recommendation to, yep, this is a good idea.
Yeah. Two things. One, I would say 55, where you're saying like, okay, we're at 55. And number two, a scenario where when we looked at that propensity of voters, remember November, only and June likely, those propensity voters, I would like to see a reverse where you have greater support in June than you have in November. We showed no difference. Anecdotally, other districts throughout the state show November is way better time to go because of the turnout. So I would like to see both 55% overall and greater support for June versus November, because that's, fundamentally the question is like, okay, what if we could maybe pass a bond in June because we saw 55%, but we could totally pass a bond in November because we get 60% or 65% because you're better off there. So to me, there would be two things that I would like to see to change and say, oh, I would go in June because we can pass it, and we have a better chance of passing in June than November would be the two data points that I would lean to.
So I've studied this a lot. I appreciate your presentation ahead of time. I also noticed in your survey, so there was 401. And I noticed, please remind me though, was it 50% that had no children or grandchildren? I see Dr. Rice. There was just something like a statistic that kind of really was, wow, that's interesting, because I'm looking at my own street and know that none of us here would that apply to on our own street that so can you just share a little bit background on that? 50% of our 400 surveyed, because it's 400 people, not households, correct?
Correct. So the
and
reason
not that had any grandchildren, any current students, past or present. Did I read that correctly?
Correct. Okay. Yeah. So the way that we do that, and in fact, the way that we do surveys, just big picture here. So you've got 70,000 registered voters. Of that, a lot of people don't have phone numbers, right? Blanks. A lot of them don't have working phone numbers. All those guys get thrown out. If you are a registered voter and you've never voted and you've been registered for years, we also dump those people. I mean, with all due respect to them, if you're not going to vote, I don't care about your opinion that much on the topic. I'd rather talk to people that are going to vote. So we strip them out. So let's just say we go from 70,000 to 50,000. Now we have a computer that does random generation of phone numbers, and it randomly spits out all these numbers over and over and over and over. And the call center goes through and they ask all the questions. And when you do a random sample, the whole point of it is so that the demographics of the 400 are reflective of the demographics of your potential registered voters. Notice I said potential, because if we said all registered voters, I would be including all of those people that have been registered but have never voted. So I'm not doing it to reflect all, but I'm doing it to reflect potential. So with that, if I've got, 40% of your voters are Democrat, 40% or thereabouts of our sample is going to be Democrat. If 22% are Libertarian, then 22% ballpark of our sample is going to be Libertarian. If 18% are Hispanic, right? You get the idea. Like the idea is this sample, and that's why you do surveying. This sample is overall going to be reflective of your voters. Now, what we don't know in our voter database is a connection to schools. So that's why we just asked that question. So we asked the question point blank. Do you have kids in school? Have you ever had kids in school? Right? And you either are never, yeah, currently, or in the past. And so that data really just confirms what we think we already know through the random sampling process, which is, okay, this is reflective of voters in Ventura Unified. So that's what the background on that question is.
Thank you. Thank you for that, the explanation. I appreciate that. I guess my next question is, and this is kind of in kind of piggyback, but also clarification to what Trustee Lomax had shared. So 1979 is our last bond, kind of getting into that ripple effect of bond over bond over bond, right? We know that many people would like to live in Ventura because there are not as many bonds as opposed to, let's say, Oxnard. That is a factor that comes up socially, but also with people that we're going to have to speak to about. And so am I understanding that in our 1979 bond is paid
1997, 97. I think you're transposing it.
Oh.
Yeah. It's still a relevant question. It was 1997.
That would be really long ago. I didn't add another generation. Okay, so 1997. Is that one all paid and clear and done? Nothing's on the books? Okay.
No, there are still payments on that. And I think they go through 2031, I think is the last payment there.
Okay. And remind me, and I apologize, Dr. Chandler has been excellent at providing this information, Dr. Rice, but remind me, this bond is going to go through when?
I would say it'll be probably similar to the 97 bond in that you're looking at a 30 to 35 year period. Much of it depends on your ability to spend the money, get the projects done, and your assessed value or your tax base growth in the district. So if we did pick a number, $400 million bond, you're not going to get all 400 million on day one because you couldn't spend $400 million within the 3-year requirement. Nor even if you could spend it and you could command all construction personnel to show up at your schools, where are you going to put all those kids as you're, constantly creating construction projects? So there's a little bit of a phasing in of projects, and consequently we try to match up the funding accordingly. Under, and I apologize, I'm getting too deep into this, but under, the Great Recession that happened, they had an inverse effect, which is we couldn't get bonds because we were going over our tax rate, right? There was a tax rate that you said we're going to stick to, not in Ventura. These would be districts that passed bonds in 2008. Santa Paula comes to mind as one of those districts. And so there are limits, right? You can't just sell bonds every time. You have to be able to accommodate those bonds with sufficient tax growth and to stay within the parameters of the tax rate. So we go out and we structure this bond. We plan on an issuance every 2 to 3 years to match your construction schedule, but we must be able to have the assessed value grow in accordance with the plan. And if there was a Great Recession 2.0, well, then all of a sudden we might not be able to access those dollars sooner. If there is a big economic expansion and major growth, as we've seen the last several years, then all of a sudden, instead of waiting 3 years, I can sell bonds 2 years later. Instead of 2 years, I can maybe sell bonds even 1 year later. So there's a give and take on what your assessed value does. But we also have to be mindful of your guys' ability to take on those projects, those bond dollars, and get things done without, disruption to the students.
I appreciate all this information. As you can imagine, a $300 million bond is something that we don't take lightly, especially one that hasn't been passed since 1997 here in Ventura for our own constituents in our community. And so I just feel that I guess a thing that I am really unsure of, because we do know that after our assessment and looking at our capital improvement reports, we're at about $1 billion. Okay, so this is definitely something that we need to be looking at. I'm assuming also hopefully our city council is looking at this, our planning committees, because one thing that it's more of a comment, and I was at, obviously, John, I saw you at AXA Superintendent Symposium. I also was at CAUSA's Focus on Results. And one thing that one presenter that was there from the State Board of Education is that we need to be a little cognizant. We need to see if the legislation will even pass. But it looks like competition of schooling, as we're seeing with our decline enrollment, is a factor. And we do know that state-of-the-art facilities, state-of-the-art programming, state-of-the-art components is an attractive piece for anyone who, not only just for the community, but also community's children, but also for people who live in that community. And so I think it's well overdue. I will just share some of my opinions on that piece of it, but I'm concerned about timing. Because when we were, Dr. Jerry Dannenberg and I were at the PAC meeting, one thing that came up, because our VET president, co-president, is a former longtime school board member with Trustee Lomax. And we asked the question when this was presented, why not? Why not until today, right? Are we coming to this? Why have you not done it before? You guys are... And what was the decision? And her piece was about timing. It really resonated with me. And Dr. Dannenberg, please, if you have, or Dr. Chandler was on, Dr. Rice, if you have different sentiment of what was shared, but what really resonated was timing. timing of its utmost. And so, and we're here today on a special board meeting with this agenda item, because it's my understanding that the resolution, if we're going to have it on a June ballot, the timing to turn in that resolution is today. So this is the information we have if we are to make that decision and move forward for a June ballot. And you know, my piece on a June ballot is we do know, or at least we're getting some insight that there, decline enrollment, competition amongst different schools and school systems. C is that, you know, there's a proposition on the bill about vouchers. And, you know, I don't know. We don't have a magic ball if that's going to pass or not pass. But I will tell you right now, if we don't have our ducks in a row or a commitment to invest in our schools and public schools, who knows what's going to happen with vouchers. I did live in Arizona where that was passed, but it just shows that if we have almost 55% now, I don't know if we can, given the changing time, it's just an interesting piece of, I don't know, you know, what November may look like as everyone's deliberating today. I do see that Trustee Lomax has her hand up, and I have no further questions. I do know that there's 2 other trustees, but.
Ms. Lomax.
I just wanted to clarify one thing, and no offense, Trustee Callahan, you made the comment that we haven't passed a bond since 1997. We haven't presented a bond to the public since 1997. I just want that to be a matter of record, that it's not that we went out and it didn't pass. It went out. We never went out.
And I guess my question when we were at PAC was, why did you never go out, right? Yeah. You had the same statistics and information. Yeah. I know that Dr. Dannenberg has worked in the past, right, with Mr. Isom and his firm for bonds in Hueneme when you were superintendent. I think every 3 to 5 years you had ongoing bonds in Hueneme. So, you know, we're all here now with this decision. And so I'm just trying to get a little bit of background of why not to date. There had to be reasons. And one of the main reasons that your former trustee had shared was timing. And so I'm just trying to see, are we the timing, right? It's kind of our question today, and kind of get different types of information around that.
Mr. Isom, I see you have your hand up.
Yes, I just wanted to speak to the timing issue because I think it's very, you know, important part of this discussion. And I just want to speak to timing about receipt of funds. If we pass the bond in June, the district would be able to, within 60 to 90 days, get its first draw, let's say $100 million for the sake of this discussion. So you're getting money in, what does that put us in? August, September. If we pass the bond in November, same thing, 60 to 90 days. If we really were desperate for money, we could get it in, you know, 30 to 45 days, jump through a bunch of hoops. But either way, you'd be looking at money in, say, February. It's rarely the financing that holds up your guys's program or any school district's construction program. It's the architect, it's DSA, it's the construction manager. So all of those were great points that were raised as far as, you know, competition and vouchers and this, that, and the other. But I believe, and unless I'm corrected otherwise, that the district's earliest that you're going to be doing any major improvements would be summer of 23. And it could quite possibly be even into 24, just given how long it takes to get through the state of California. So with that backdrop, and again, on the focus of timing, the timing should, in my opinion, be primarily driven by when do I have the best chance for success? Because getting the money, you know, in October or in February isn't going to change your guys' lives. So it's really about when can I give myself the best chance to get money, period, because it'll be there before you need to start your construction. So just wanted to give you that context. Sometimes people confuse parcel taxes and when you get money with them and you have to wait. Bonds are totally different. 60 to 90 days from election day to money in the bank. And so I don't think, you know, that would be too big of a concern, at least based on my understanding of the district's program.
Dr. Chandler, I see you have your hand up, but Dr. Dannenberg's been waiting, so I'm going to let him go.
Thank you. This really is a question maybe for Velma because she's been on the board. But when you talk about timing, Amy, I think that the real question is, I don't believe, and I wasn't on the board, that's why I'm asking Velma to answer it. I think you were told timing, but I don't think the issue was ever brought before the board since it was brought by our president administration since the last bond was passed. So you can say timing all you want, but if you didn't do the study, you didn't get it out there, it was maybe individually they didn't want to bring it up. But I don't believe the board ever addressed the idea of going for another bond. So I don't think you can actually say timing other than it was a personal issue maybe by that particular board member. But the whole board, I don't think ever looked at it before.
And I'm just going to share back again. I think there was miscommunication in what I construed. So in what I construed to Dr. Dannenberg. I am just trying
let me clarify something. I think this will help. When you go for a facilities bond, like we're discussing right now, that money is very, very restricted. You can only use it on brick and mortar. You can only use it on certain things. We even had to go through some bells and whistles and hoops to get it to be able to spend it on technology for wiring and things because it had to be considered infrastructure. It has to be something that the state and the public considers more permanent. So at the time that we probably should have gone out for a bond, we needed money for the arts, for CTE, so we determined at that time with our expert, we never really discussed going out for a bond again because we then switched to a parcel tax. They could be used for things like in the classroom, paying a teacher to do what Heidi does and for the music and arts and whatever. And so we felt at the time that was a focus that we needed to have money that didn't have so many restrictions. So Dr. Dannenberg is absolutely right. We as a board did not discuss going out for a facilities bond again because the timing was that we needed money that we could use in the classroom. And that's what we went out to the public, and we've been successful in our parcel tax. And that's very important for the public to understand. They're two entirely different pots of money that can only be used a certain way. So the timing is that the previous board member, Debbie Golden, was referring to was how we could use the money and what the money was necessary for to keep our district going the way that the luxury that we have today. So I hope that answers the question.
I would also love to address what Mr. Isom said earlier. I would say for us in our facilities department to do a large project that requires DSA approval takes anywhere from a year to a year and a half of planning and the approval process. And right now, the latest that we've heard from DSA is they're about 6 months behind in their approval process, which would add additional time to that. So if we go in June or we go in November, it's still going to be some time before you see the bond taking place on the campuses, before you see the results of the bond. If we're doing something that doesn't require DSA approval, then that could be done quicker, but it's as quick as, a lot of things require DSA approval, things you wouldn't necessarily think. So my personal opinion is seeing what Mr. Isom is presenting and what our community is stating. I mean, I agree with his recommendation that November would probably be we'd probably have more success in November than we would in June. That's my opinion.
Thank you, Dr. Chandler. Ms. Callahan, do you have anything else? So, and just for you all, President Alvarez had to jump off. He really wasn't feeling well. But I guess, so my concern is currently there are 2 bond measures that are slated for the November ballot, likely working through the legislative process, both education bond measures, which I think have a huge value for us, but my concern is being on the same ballot as other education-oriented ballot measures and on the same ballot as something as politically divisive as vouchers or I just happened to look at Ballotpedia because so there's a raise to the minimum wage that's working its way through the process. There are a lot of things pending for this, including an art and music funding proposition that are working their way through the process, which I think is going to make it more confusing for people when they're looking at a local bond measure and a state bond measure. And I don't think most people understand the difference when they're being asked to pay money for this and pay money for that. I do think that the average person is like, well, now I'm being, taxed twice. I don't personally have any reservation about moving forward with the bond measure. I think this is something that is critically important for our district. It's something that we need to do to update our schools and to make them competitive. To me, the only question is timing. And so personally, I think we would have a heavy lift to get it on, to get enough support for the June ballot. But I think this community, if we really do the work to say, here's why it's important, I think the community will support us. And I think that waiting until November, there's a lot of external factors that we won't have any control over. Yes, I also wonder, and Mr. Eisen, maybe you can answer this, is how much do you feel like the conversation around inflation that seemed to be so prevalent in the news in January would have impacted people's response to something like an additional tax, right? Because I feel like everywhere you went in January, there was conversation around inflation, and how much the average person was seeing that their bottom line was being impacted. And now that conversation is a little bit dying away as the feds respond to interest rates and all those things. So I guess, and all of those are things we can't control, but I would love to get your perspective.
Yeah, so with respect to timing and we'll call them companion measures, right? Stuff that's also on the ballot. I am not concerned about that, and I'll give you a few examples. It was June, a low turnout election, and we had Oxnard High and Pleasant Valley on the same ballot. And you guys know the demographics and you know the communities well enough to know. And both of them passed. Not by a ton, but they both passed in a low turnout election. Let me take you to the North State up in Shasta County, Reading. I had a college bond, the high school district, the elementary district, and the city of Reading all putting forward taxes. We worked with the 3 education districts, not the city of Reading. All 3 of those guys passed. They all went in November, big turnout. Historically speaking, because this is a question, it's a great question, everyone asks it all the time. What about the state bond on the same ballot? I actually went back and I looked at all of the historical performances of bond elections. In fact, if I still have screen share, I had this pulled up the other day. Do I still have that up? Okay, let me see if I can find this real quick.
You can share, John.
Okay, great. Okay. Can you guys see this GeoBond historical performance? If you can see this, I'll take you through it. This was a March versus November, but really I want to draw your attention to the bar graph. In yellow, statewide bond, okay? The red is the average, so just above 80%. And then the blue just is essentially representative of all of the elections that happened. The one red, March of 2020, of course, was the Prop 13 COVID nightmare. But a couple of good things I want to point out here. If you look to the very far right-hand side, November 2020, you had 80% success rate among those on the ballot in November. So are districts passing bonds during the pandemic? Absolutely, okay? The other thing is the yellows. Take a look at the yellows. The yellows are when we had a statewide bond on the same ballot. And the argument, a pretty strong one, is that you actually do a little bit better, historically speaking, having that on the same ballot. So having a bond on the same ballot as the other bond, a statewide bond, or even other issues there's always going to be kooky and crazy propositions. We're California, love us or leave us, but that's kind of what we have here. But the idea of having and I'm going to stop screen sharing here. The idea of having a statewide ballot being a concern to me is not. And here's my theory. I don't have any data to support it, but this is the theory, I think for every one person that might say, oh man, I'm confused, or I'm going to vote no on all bonds, I think you might have 1.5 or 2 people that are getting extra publicity on the radio, on the TV, on the internet, in the mail about support our children, support our kids, vote yes on bonds for kids, right? So in some ways we get an extra bump. Maybe there's a little takeaway, or maybe it's a neutral, maybe it's just a nothing, I don't know. But the data, and I'm obviously very data driven here, the data shows me that having a statewide bond on the ballot is probably a plus as opposed to a negative. So
the other half of my question, and I'm glad you brought up that Prop 13, the impact of that on the November 2020, because we are looking at a voucher initiative, right, which is going to bring up, in my opinion, a lot of conversations around public schools and parental rights and whether or not our public schools are serving our students. I think, what is your sense about what impact that might have on a November ballot?
I mean, it could have an impact, but I'll be honest. I think voters, and this is what I learned from surveys, doing surveys for districts all the time. And actually in a prior life in college, I actually was the guy making the phone calls. And I got paid per completion. And I learned very quickly that local issues paid way better than national issues. So anytime they would say, who wants to call on this local whatever, I'd raise my hand because I could get more completes, and I could go from $6 an hour up to 12. It was pretty good. But here's what I learned is that people distinguish and care about local issues, even if they don't care about or understand statewide or even national issues. Could there be someone that gets caught up in the frenzy of it and decides to just stake out a claim that all things education, public education, are bad? Maybe, but I think that's going to be significantly offset by just the large turnout. If we went back, and I'm not going to pull it up, but that slide that I showed you, right? We've got over 20 data points of elections in the history. And the highest the highest success rate in the history of Prop 39 elections was right after 9/11. Think about that. Like, talk about getting knocked to your knees, massive uncertainty, complete insecurity. What does this mean? How does this affect me? Oh my goodness. All of the bonds were on. You couldn't pull a bond off out of fear. You couldn't say, oh shoot, so we had to just let it ride and do your best. And there was 100% success rate. Never would have dreamed we would have had 100% post 9/11, but it was kind of indicative of, I think, the mood of America. The lowest, skipping, the March election and Prop 13, the lowest election success rate in history prior to that was June of 2006. And that was 60% of all the bonds passed. And when you think of June of 2006, you think, well, wait a minute, Iraq war was in the rearview mirror. We'd been in Afghanistan for a long time. The economy was smoking, right? It was awesome. Like, everyone had tons of money. Home prices were going through the roof. Life was good in June of 2006. So why the loss? Turnout. June of 2006 was the lowest turnout election in the last 20 years. So turnout matters. And that's why, again, my recommendation when we talk about it is, I think the higher turnout, again, has been proven to be a winner in your community. You've passed 3 67% measures in a big turnout election, right? 3 of them. I think, again, while your data, for whatever reason, didn't show a stark contrast between, November and June people, in every other survey that I can even think of, there is a difference. It's just a different voter. The low prop voter who just kind of occasionally shows up is a different voter. Now, someone made the comment like, who knows what's going to happen in November? Yeah, that is the big question mark. Who knows what's going to happen in November? But who knows what's going to happen this June either? Things could get markedly worse. So all things being equal, that's why, you know, I've come back to this. Even with a state bond on the same ballot, high turnout election in Ventura has been successful for you guys and is successful for most California school districts. And we are in a scenario where people are more sensitive. So I would say what gives me the best chance, I think that higher turnout election in November, because I think we need the best chance given that overall throughout the state, there's been an erosion of support on these bond measures, including Ventura.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments, board members? Selma?
I have a question. What does it cost us to, if we went on the June ballot and then had to go back again on the November ballot? I'm not saying we should do that. I just want to know all the options.
Yeah, so any school district that holds a bond measure has to pay the registrar of voters, right, to conduct that election on your behalf. A June election is going to be generally more expensive because there's less things on the ballot, fewer things. So you would bear the cost of a June ballot and split that among whatever else is there, all the primary races and a few propositions. And then if you were unsuccessful, you would have to pay again a lower rate, but you would be paying again and bearing the cost of what it would cost to put on the November election. But if you said, well, which is the cheaper of the two? Well, November's going to be cheaper just because there's more things in that ballot.
I guess, and then my other question, John, is what do you ever suggest people do that, or is that bad to do that? Does that make it so that the voters would absolutely say no because you had to go out twice? I'm just curious.
Yeah, I don't have a good answer to that. I've had enough experience where you go in June, let's say, and you fail, but you just barely fail, and then you throw it in November, and everyone's all upset because they didn't work hard enough or they didn't turn out to vote in June. So it's like, golly, come on, let's go. And then all of a sudden everybody shows up, and I've seen the elections go to your favor. Wow, good job. Now we approved it by 5 percentage points more. On the flip side, I've seen it where if you lose badly and then you come back, there's kind of that stain of losing, right? Like, wait a minute, didn't we just tell you no? What are you doing coming back to us? So, you know, I've seen both sides. I wish I had some data that would say, you know, more often than not, it's one versus the other. But our recommendation is always just going to be, when do you have the best chance of success? And some districts, you know, they're going to be successful regardless of when they go. And so oftentimes you say, well, why don't we just put you in June? Pleasant Valley and Oxnard, of course, both fit that bill that particular year. But that's going to be our recommendation, your best chance for success.
And one of the reasons I asked that is I didn't see a huge difference in the percentages, whether we went in June or November. And so other than the advantage of voter turnout in November, but the poll was sort of the same, almost the same percentage wise. So that's why I threw that out.
Yeah. Yeah. If we relied just on the poll, yeah, you could flip a coin. And so that's why we try to bring all information to bear, all your voting history in Ventura, other surveys, other districts, just the whole, you know, the whole ball of wax.
Ms. Callahan.
Thank you. I had the same question, Trustee Lomax. And so I guess I was looking for a little bit of a range. Is it 10 to 50,000? For our registrar to put the ballot on for June? You said it would be less because it's divided up. I know that we've all done our own campaigns, but what is the ballpark range for the cost? Let's say we're the only one. Let me just put out a scenario.
Let's not go there because it would be extraordinarily expensive if you were the only one. You know, and Rebecca, chime in if you have a sense, because I think at one point in time we had asked this question of what it would cost to put it on the ballot, but this was years ago, and I apologize. I don't know.
We pay for that, right?
You pay for it. General fund writes the check.
Okay.
Could be reimbursed from bond proceeds, but yeah, you guys are expected to put that forward. I'm going to say it's probably in the $125,000 to $150,000 range.
Okay.
You know, based on your 70,000 voters. But again, some part of me says that I thought this question was asked years ago. So I don't know if Roger or Rebecca has that off the top of their.
I think that sounds correct to me, Mr.
So we're not talking $500,000. We're not talking 25,000. We're talking, you know, about a
6 figures. Yeah, for
150,
sure.
200, let's just say.
Yep. I think that would be a fair ballpark.
Okay. And then, so I guess another question, I do share also, right? We just learned that the grant for CTE dollars for $5 million around facilities and buildings that was already approved, right? But it wasn't appropriated. Help me if my wording isn't right. But Dr. Chandler and Dr. Rice had shared that is coming through. Is that right?
Yeah.
Which is really exciting. And so this is just kind of my thinking is that with permissions and bandwidth, because I think, you know, as one of the speakers, I'm just terming what they said. It is really important as we're looking at these upcoming issues. One recommendation, again, it was from one of the state board members, and then they had also another advisor and then a superintendent at CALSA, is it's no longer the pandemic, it's the plandemic. Districts really need to be looking at more than just one-offs and, you know, getting through kind of you know, the crises, which we did just experience yet again, that we're going to be looked at to be having meaningful plans, not for just the year by year, in this case, the short sprints to the end of the year, let's say, but really looking at 5, 10 year, that's going to be an expectation of us. And that really resonated, and it resonates me today because with the 5 million, with this on our plate, with all the other, we're really being prudent and intentional and fiscal stewards of our ESSER dollars. We are not, as everyone knows, we will call a special board meeting. We will look at the LCAP. We will survey. We are very thorough. We are not just one-offing any of these plans as the dollars come through. Dr. Chandler is shaking her head, also serves as a trustee at a different district, so can maybe do a little comparison. We are very intentional as a governance team. And I am, you know, this is why we have these. This is the only time we can talk, right? And I am in favor of, I mean, I don't know when, am I allowed to say this now, Sabrina? Like, I'm in favor of putting it on a June ballot and thank you for all of your expertise. Everyone knows on this team, I have to hear things sometimes 7 or 8 different times and kind of take in all the different factors. But I think this goes right along that we are Ventura Unified. We provide excellence. We have an expectation of excellence, and we are planning for the future to make this realization. And it's this team that makes that happen. I'm just going to give some bragging rights to Dr. Chandler. They received when she was Chief Innovation Officer, they received a grant for Cellulose Ranch. There's 3 in the county. We're the 3rd now, right? And it's actually going to be a producing, you know, an actual where we can sell. And there's just so many amazing connections that they're doing. And it is absolutely, without a doubt, this all happened before I was even on. It happened without a doubt. And without a doubt, it will be a lighthouse for not just our county or our state, but for the nation and quite possibly even international. And Dr. Chandler and Dr. Rice did this in 1.5 years. It is literally like a mile down my street. And so, because another piece is, right, inflation, how much is it going to cost to get some of this done? But what I have to say is, I do kind of want to look at a little bit what your guys' thoughts are as a team, because we're talking about cost. We know that it might be a heavy lift if we do approve for it to be in the June, and we're going to have a team behind that. And do you have the bandwidth, or are we going to also have to invest in another team to outfit the campaign? And who pays for that? And so I guess these are kind of, and because it's my understanding one of our future board meetings or past board meetings that the folks, and I was shocked, and I actually asked this at CSBA at a Form 700 session, that because it's a campaign, all the, sounds like benefactors or all in the bonds, they actually pay for the campaign. So again, I kind of want to just get, is that really true? And then I know also, so I'm like on number 4, I know on a past meeting, we did talk about Dr. Dannenberg, just for your protection. And you had asked Council Ramos about conflict of interest. Like I had mentioned, you know, is this because your work with Mr. Isom from before, you've done business, is this a remote conflict of interest? Do you need to recuse yourself? And so there were some of those pieces, because we do know that this vote, if it's going to be on June, will have to happen today.
So can I answer the question about the funding of the campaign? So that has to be done completely outside of work hours, and it has to be done through donation. So any of us who want to volunteer our time to getting the bond campaign going, we would help raise funds. It'd be a totally separate bank account. And it can't be done during work hours or through work emails or phones or any of that. And correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Rice or John Isom, but it is its own entity to run that campaign.
100%.
However, you can provide information to our people through the school district about the benefits. You can't ask them to vote one way or another, but we can do some stuff through the school district, but it has to be very careful how you do that.
Yes. Also 100%. District cannot advocate one position or another. However, it should and is encouraged to provide factual information. That must be fair and balanced. You can't just say, okay, if you pass this measure, it's going to do all these awesome things. You have to say, if you pass this measure, which is a tax rate of blank per 100,000 and is a GO bond, it's going to do all these awesome things, right? So we can't just say, well, I never said vote yes, and only present the good without, you know, the flip side of the coin. So yes, Jerry's right. There are things that the district can do, and we work with you guys on making sure that, you know, you're saying the right things in the right manner.
To Ms. Callahan's other question, though, my understanding is there are kind of a couple of options when it comes to running the campaign, right? One is that we rely on volunteers and do that, and then the other option is essentially that we pay for those services. Is that accurate?
Yeah, you know, you're always going to have some volunteers. You're just going to have to. But you can rely on volunteers for the kind of the more administrative related tasks, like putting together a mailer, putting together a phone list or a walk flyer, and organize, you know, volunteers. But the everyday, you know, kind of boots on the ground, so to speak, you know, usually comes at a local level. But some of the higher level, if you want to call it that, expertise can certainly be paid for. Again, from non-district proceeds. It's got to be those donations that.
Yeah. So because when we did the last parcel tax, we opted to do essentially almost everything with volunteers.
Mm-hmm.
That was a small, relatively small initiative and something that we had done before. This is a whole different ball game, really, and so would probably be something that we would need to hire expertise to help us do. Is that, I mean, a fair assessment?
To me, the cost of that investment is worth, you know, several $100 million. I mean, the stakes are pretty high, and so I wouldn't necessarily encourage the district to just say, hey, just wing it. You know, you guys could pull this off, and maybe you could, but you know, it's kind of like this June, November discussion. It's like, maybe you could pass in June, but I think you have a better chance in November. Maybe you could pass a bond with just volunteers, but I think you have a better chance with some professional expertise, right? The stakes are pretty high. So I think that's why I think it would be worthwhile. But those are things that, you know, when the time is right, can be discussions. You can have interviews. You could talk to different professionals and get a sense of, all right, well, what am I getting from this? And do I want to spend that kind of money on that? Or is that just too pricey? Or do I really think I can pull that off myself? You know, so a lot of it is just, I think, learning from these consultants and understanding, okay, tell me all these great things that you're going to do. And wow, okay, that's worth it to me, or it's not. But those would be discussions I would encourage. And it can be held at the board level. Oftentimes it's kind of at an admin level or an ad hoc type committee level, because the board hiring a campaign consultant doesn't really make a lot of sense. But oftentimes a board hires like a public information consultant who then segues into a role of a campaign consultant with a local citizens group.
Dr. Royce, it seemed like you were going to say something.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to respond to the bandwidth issue. I think everybody knows we're pedaling pretty fast, and we've got some new folks in some key positions, and we would want to be cognizant of it. But at the same time, I think Dr. Chandler and Board Vice President Rodriguez and Mr. Isom are all correct in saying this is a high stakes issue. And I assume that, like the parcel tax, that when it comes time for the board to set priorities, that this would be a priority and that we would work hard to support that priority and do the best we could. You guys are the elected representatives of your community. You know your community and what's most likely to happen. I have to trust and respect that, and know that if you guys say it's a priority, staff's going to mobilize and do what we can to support it, of course.
Thank you. Ms. Lomax?
I hope this is my final question. Today, we are required to, if we are going to go in June, we are required to do a resolution and post that resolution, correct? If we post a resolution, then 2 weeks or 3 weeks from now decide this wasn't the greatest idea, is there a penalty? Is it no harm, no foul? I'm just curious where we are in the process.
Well, if you wanted to proceed to June, the resolution as presented, or in some modified form, would be approved by the board at what is known as 2/3 of the sitting board. Now, if you've got a 5-member board, obviously 2/3 doesn't do very good math, but that just means 4 affirmative yeses to approve the resolution. So if you've got, like I said, regardless of how many board members are even present, if there was only 3 board members today, you couldn't even pass it, even if it was 3-0. So you'd have to have 4 approved, 4 yes votes on this. The resolution would then be taken to the registrar of voters and submitted to the registrar of voters, and then they would establish.
And is that deadline today?
That deadline is today.
So once you present it to the registrar of voters, it's a done deal.
I believe there might be a window of rescission where you might be able to rescind that resolution, but I've never done it.
Okay.
So it's one of those, you kind of hear about it, or someone thinks maybe you could do it. Okay. But I think for all intents and purposes, yeah, it would be a done deal. And then once the registrar receives that, then they'll establish a timeline for receiving arguments and tax rates.
Yeah, I understand how that works. I was just wondering about the actual filing. So today would be the filing. So under those circumstances, I'm leaning towards November.
Thank you. Ms. Callahan, did you have a question, or were you looking to make a motion?
No, I have a question. It sounds like then we can't even make a motion because we don't have all of us here.
You can make a motion. We would have to be unanimous in our support.
There's just 4 of you on the call right now.
Well, then I also brought up, right, does the remote conflict of interest with Dr. Dannenberg.
I don't see, I'm not a lawyer, but in the world of education, if you go from district to district, you're going to work with different people at different times. I don't perceive that as a conflict of interest, but then again, I'm not a lawyer, so.
And the question I asked was, it was a conflict of interest for me to vote on the hiring of Mr. Isom, not my voting on whether we do a bond or not.
Oh, point. So is he, if we vote on this bond, is he who we're hiring?
He's already our bond counsel. He's already been hired.
So I guess that goes to Council Ramos. Insight, because I've heard twice now, like I'm not a lawyer either. I'm just bringing this up. I'm bringing up the topic.
Would you like me to respond, Dr. Rice?
Yes, please.
So the conflict of interest analysis would depend on whether or not there's any monetary gain by any of the board members involved when we look at this type of situation. So it's a very complicated process. And so in order to be able to come up with a definitive answer on whether or not there is a prohibited conflict of interest on whether or not to vote, we would have to do that analysis. However, in this particular case, I'm not aware of any financial gain by Dr. Dannenberg for requesting that Mr. Isom be included in the, my recollection is the RFP to see who was going to be our consultant for the bond. So on its face, I don't see anything, but again, realize that the conflict of interest analysis is very complicated and we would need to get into a lot more factual findings. But at the time, there was nothing that was brought up that would indicate that there would be a conflict. But at the board's pleasure, that can be done.
I'm only one of 5, and I was looking more of the remote conflict. And I know that Dr. Chandler follows all the RFP components, and I'm just being very mindful, and it's really for all of our components of, how, and I wasn't here on that RFP process, why it was selected. And I do know legal counsel was asked to look at certain parts. And so it's specific to Jerry's, Dr. Dannenberg's question. So I would like to provide a motion, and please help me and correct me. I am rusty and don't do this, to look at passing the resolution and including this GO bond on the June election.
Okay, do we have a second? Okay, so since that doesn't have support, is there an alternative motion? So I guess procedural question again for Mr. Ramos. So assuming that we don't have a motion to move forward, we are not taking action, which means we will not be putting this particular item on the board for June. But it could come back to us later for the Novembers. Everyone's shaking their heads. Okay. Thank you.
And I would like to suggest that we have the discussion for going on the November ballot much sooner so that we have time to prepare and properly go out and get the support.
We could have that discussion. I mean, I feel like we just did have the discussion, but we could. No,
but we need to make a plan. We need to make a plan of how we're going to do it, whether or not we're going to hire a consultant, whether we feel we should start on our own. But I think sooner rather than later.
Yeah, we can get right to work on that. And again, I appreciate the board's patience on the abbreviated timeline. We didn't want to bring it forward to you before we had any tracking poll results. And this time, I would also recommend that we take Mr. Isom up on his recommendation to run another tracking poll, probably in May. We would, of course, keep you guys apprised of that so that when we do bring back an item, you have an updated set of information of what the community is saying.
What do these tracking polls cost us?
I'd have to check. I want to say about $7,500. I haven't received the invoice back. Essentially, we just passed the cost of the calls to you guys from the call center, but I want to say 7,500 sounds about right.
And do you have a ballpark of what the consultant would cost? the campaign, just in your industry? I have no idea about this world.
Yeah, no, great question. And it really ranges anywhere.
So let's say the middle of the road, middle of the road service. Not the, Cadillac,
Yeah, middle of the road is probably in the $50,000 to $75,000 range.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think maybe as we move forward, maybe we can get some of this just in a Friday letter, some of these anticipated expenses just for board information. Other than that, if there is no further discussion, there is no reason for us to return to closed session.
No.
Correct? Okay. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Vote as follows. Trustee Lomax,
Yes.
Trustee Vandenberg,
Yes.
Trustee Callahan,
Yes.
and Trustee Rodriguez.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion carries 4-0.
Thank you, Mr. Isom, for being here with us today. And thank you all for your time. I know we will be gathering again soon.
Thank you.
Have a good one. Bye-bye.